Let's start with our first part A, this trig identity. Very simple in my opinion. We first start with the more complicated side. So out of the left and the right hand side, the left hand side looks a lot more complicated, and we can make it simpler from there. So this one's very simple just because you have your compound angle formulas on your formula booklet, so all you really need to do is just copy those down. So we get sine x cos y plus sine y cos x. Okay, so that's our first one. Our next one, our sine x minus y, you can rewrite that as sine x cos y. So the exact same thing. The only difference here is you have a minus sign. So minus sine y cos x. All right. Your next step would be to FOIL this out. Okay, so to FOIL this out, you do the firsts. Since the first term in both of these, in both of the parentheses are the same, you can just square that. So we get sine squared x cos squared y. Okay, then you do your outsides. So a positive times a negative is a negative, so we put a negative in front. I'm going to work with the signs first, so you get sine x, sine y, and then you can move on to the cosines, cos y, cos x. All right, then we move on to the insides. This is getting a little long, so I'm just going to put that on the next line. So we get plus sine y, sine x, cos x, cos y. And then our last, so a positive times negative, we get a negative again. And it's the same term, so we can square that again. So sine squared y, cos squared x. My writing's getting a little messy, but hopefully you can read it. Now notice that these two middle terms are the exact same. So we have a sine y, sine x, cos y in both of them. The only difference is this is a plus, this is a minus, so that means that they cancel out. So we can just get rid of those. And we are left with sine squared x cos squared y minus sine squared y cos squared x. Okay, so it looks like we're almost done. This is what we want, right? We want this. Notice that there's no cosines in what we want, and yet we do have cosines in our answer. So what I want to do here is replace these cosines with something without cosines. And the easiest way to do that would be to use your Pythagorean identity. So remember, what was your Pythagorean identity? Your Pythagorean identity was, and this is really important because for most of the questions, you're probably going to be using this. So that's going to be sine squared x plus cos squared x equals 1. It doesn't necessarily need to be x, it could be y, it could be a, it could be phi. So we're just rearranging that to change our cosine squared y into 1 minus sine squared y. Okay, same thing over here. We have sine squared y, changing this cosine into a sine. So 1 minus sine squared x. Okay, distributing these in, we will get sine squared x minus sine squared x sine squared y. Okay, distributing this negative sine squared y into this term. Remember, we are keeping the negatives, sine squared y, negative times a negative, that becomes a positive. So we get sine squared y sine squared x. Okay, notice that we have two of these sine squared x, sine squared y. One is negative, one's a positive. So in the same way we did before, those cancel out, and we are left with sine squared x minus sine squared y. Is that what we wanted? Yes, that is what we wanted, so we are done.